I stood on the street corner, the neon lights of Tokyo casting a faint glow across the city's endless hustle and bustle. The air was thick with humidity, and the sounds of the city, cars honking, voices calling out, the distant hum of trains overhead, seemed so distant in this quiet part of the district. This wasn't a place I would have normally chosen to walk, but it was exactly where I was supposed to be. Waiting. I had agreed to spend a day with Japan's most dangerous mafia, and now, all I could do was wait for my entry into a world I had only ever seen through media portrayals and whispered rumors. The weight of my decision settled over me as I stood in the shadows of the street. The Yakuza were a secretive group, their operations hidden beneath layers of carefully constructed facades. Stories about them were always dramatic, ruthless criminals in sharp suits operating in dark corners of society, with their influence extending far beyond the reaches of law enforcement. Yet, I knew little about the people behind the myth. I wasn't here to sensationalize or make assumptions. I was here to see it firsthand. I wanted to understand how they lived, how they managed to control vast sectors of society while remaining mostly out of sight. The quiet moments stretched on as I stood, deep in thought. I glanced at the building across the street, a nondescript office building, its exterior plain and uninviting. This was a far cry from the seedy underworld I had envisioned. There were no signs of danger here, no dark alleyways or low-lit clubs. Just ordinary people walking by, oblivious to the meeting that was about to take place just a few steps away. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to enter a world that most people would never see. A world where everything appeared normal, but was deeply entwined with a quiet, ever-present danger. Finally, a black car pulled up along the curb, its windows tinted so dark that I could barely make out the shapes inside. The driver opened the door without a word, and I stepped in, the door closing behind me with a soft click. There were no pleasantries exchanged, no introductions. I simply sat back in the plush interior, the soft hum of the car's engine the only sound. The drive felt deliberate, as if we were taking our time, not in a rush, every turn and stop controlled. There was no wasted movement. It was almost as if they were teaching me, through silence and calculated actions, that nothing was left to chance. The city around us seemed to blur by, unfamiliar streets and buildings melting together in the darkness. After what felt like an eternity, the car slowed to a stop in front of a high-rise building. It was tall and unremarkable, nestled in a part of town that felt detached from the rest of the city. This place wasn't meant to be seen. It existed behind closed doors, out of the view of the everyday passerby. The building had a quiet power about it, an air of being tucked away from the world, yet crucial to the larger structure of things. As the elevator rose to the top floor, I could feel the weight of the experience settling around me. I had no idea what awaited me at the top, but I knew I was stepping into something far deeper than I could ever fully understand. The elevator doors slid open to reveal a narrow hallway, and as I walked down it, the tension in the air seemed to heighten with every step. It wasn't a place that felt welcoming, but neither did it feel hostile. It was a place of business, a place where power was wielded with care and precision, not with aggression or anger. When I was led into the room, the first thing I noticed was the silence. The men inside the room didn't make a sound. They simply sat, their eyes trained on me, their presence heavy with unspoken authority. At the head of the room sat the boss. The moment I saw him, I understood what they meant when they spoke about the respect one earns within the Yakuza. He wasn't dressed like the violent, chaotic figure I'd imagined. There was nothing overtly intimidating about him. He was simply a man, older than I had expected, perhaps in his mid-60s, with the kind of weathered face that spoke of a life lived with purpose. His presence, however, was undeniable. He was calm, unhurried, and when he finally spoke, his voice was low and measured. There was no aggression, no dominance in the way he spoke. Instead, it was the sort of voice that conveyed years of experience, years of knowing exactly what was needed and when. I immediately realized that the Yakuza wasn't about chaos as I had imagined. It wasn't about brute force or mindless violence. It was about control, about a system so finely tuned that it didn't need to resort to overt intimidation to keep things in line. Power didn't come from violence. It came from precision, from understanding human nature and the delicate balance that allowed them to remain untouchable. The conversation that followed was unlike anything I had expected. The boss spoke of the Yakuza not as criminals, but as protectors. The Yakuza, to him, was a response to societal failure, an organization built to restore order where the law could not. It was a stark contrast to the dark, criminal empire I had envisioned, and the reality of it sent a chill through me. I began to realize that the Yakuza operated not just in the shadows, but in a gray area, one where violence was just a tool, not the primary force driving them. As the meeting progressed, I could feel myself beginning to shift in my understanding of the Yakuza. It wasn't a group of mindless thugs or ruthless killers. It was a complex, deeply ingrained part of society, one that thrived in the unseen spaces, governing its own rules, maintaining its own balance. The boss's words resonated with me. The Yakuza wasn't just a group of men. It was a living entity, one that existed to fill a void left by a world that couldn't protect everyone. And as I sat there, listening to him speak, I knew I was witnessing something far larger, far more intricate than I had ever anticipated. The silence in the room felt almost suffocating, but it was not uncomfortable. It was as though the air itself was charged with the weight of unspoken words, every movement carefully calculated. The boss, sitting at the head of the table, continued to observe me with a calmness that made it clear he had been in control of situations far more intense than this one. His eyes, steady and piercing, conveyed the message that I was here on his terms, and I was not to rush anything. Every detail, every gesture had a purpose in this world. As he spoke, I listened carefully, trying to piece together the fragmented image I had of the Yakuza. The stories I had heard, often sensationalized and distorted, suddenly seemed too simplistic. The Yakuza wasn't just a criminal syndicate operating in the shadows of society. It was a far more nuanced organization, built on an intricate web of relationships, loyalty, and power. The boss explained that their role in society went beyond mere criminal activity. The Yakuza, he said, emerged in the aftermath of Japan's war-ravaged years, stepping in where the law could not reach, filling a vacuum created by a broken system. His voice remained steady as he described how the Yakuza viewed themselves, not as outcasts, but as protectors of a certain order. In his eyes, they weren't the villains of society, but rather the ones who kept things from completely falling apart. He spoke of the Yakuza's role in overseeing areas that the government had neglected, places where corruption had bred, where the poor were exploited, and where justice was often only available to those who could afford it. In these corners of society, the Yakuza maintained a code, one that demanded unwavering loyalty and respect. Their presence, in his view, had been essential for survival in a world where traditional institutions failed to meet the needs of the people. The room remained still, and I began to realize that the Yakuza weren't just a group of criminals. They were a highly organized entity with a purpose, albeit one that existed outside of the conventional moral boundaries I had always believed in. The boss's calmness only deepened as he elaborated on the delicate balance they maintained in their operations. Violence, he admitted, was a part of it, but it was not the foundation. It was a tool used only when necessary to maintain control and discipline. To the Yakuza, honor was paramount. Betrayal was the ultimate crime, and the punishment for it was swift and unforgiving. In the world of the Yakuza, there was no room for weakness, no room for uncertainty. As he spoke, I could feel myself being drawn deeper into a world I had never fully understood. A world where the lines between good and evil were blurred, where justice was not handed down by the state, but by an unyielding code. I was beginning to see that the Yakuza wasn't some monolithic evil force. It was a living, breathing entity that adapted to its environment. The boss's words painted a picture of an organization built not just on crime, but on an understanding of the human condition, a deep knowledge of loyalty, power, and survival. And in that world, I was just beginning to scratch the surface. As the day continues, the deeper I get into the Yakuza's world, the more I realize how methodical and calculated everything is. Nothing happens by accident. The Yakuza don't operate on impulse. They're a well-oiled machine built on years of tradition, discipline, and an unbreakable hierarchy. I watch closely, trying to piece together how they manage to stay so deeply embedded in society while remaining untouched by the law. The operations I witnessed throughout the day are surprisingly low-key. It's a far cry from the violent, explosive imagery I had in my head before coming here. Instead of loud confrontations, I see quiet, efficient transactions. A few men sit in a conference room discussing finances with the same kind of focus you'd expect from any legitimate business. The only difference is the nature of their dealings. They speak in hushed tones, never allowing their voices to rise above a certain level, as if to avoid drawing attention from outsiders. The conversations are centered around money, how to move it, how to hide it, how to make it grow. They talk about investments in legitimate businesses as well as their underground operations, which include everything from loan sharking to more illicit activities like human trafficking and drug distribution. What strikes me most about this is how seamlessly these operations are woven into the fabric of everyday life. The Yakuza are not confined to back alleys or underground clubs. They exist in plain sight, often operating under the guise of legitimate businesses. The man leading the discussion explains that they've invested in everything from construction companies to strip clubs, allowing them to launder money while keeping a low profile. It's not about creating chaos. It's about maintaining control over a vast network that runs through the city's veins like blood, invisible yet essential. We leave the building and head to a local nightclub, one of many fronts the Yakuza run. The club is dark, with neon lights casting an eerie glow over the patrons, who seem oblivious to the sinister operations taking place just below the surface. There's a strange mix of glamour and danger in the air. Men in expensive suits exchange whispered deals over drinks, while women move gracefully between tables, their eyes trained to spot anyone who might be out of place. It's not hard to see how these establishments double as hubs for illegal activity. But there's something unsettling about the way everything operates so smoothly, as if everyone involved understands the unspoken rules. The Yakuza aren't just criminals, they're masters of control. Every detail of their operations is carefully crafted, every move calculated. As I watch the interaction between the boss and his men, I can see how important it is for them to maintain an air of order and respect. No one raises their voice. There's no shouting or visible anger. Even when disagreements arise, they are handled with quiet precision, usually behind closed doors, out of sight of outsiders. In this world, aggression is never the first choice. Instead, it's a tool used only when absolutely necessary, when the balance of power is threatened. The sense of order is eerie. It's a world where everyone knows their place, and there's no room for deviation. I notice the way the lower-ranking members act around the boss, deferential but not servile, cautious but not fearful. They seem to understand that their survival depends not just on obedience, but on maintaining a certain level of respect for the organization and its leader. In many ways, it's as if they are part of a greater purpose, something larger than themselves. As the night wears on, I can't help but feel the weight of what I'm witnessing. The Yakuza may not appear to be a chaotic force. They don't scream or make a scene, but their power is undeniable. It's subtle, pervasive, and often invisible, but it's everywhere. The system they've built is a tight, almost imperceptible web that reaches into every corner of society, and I'm starting to see that it's a far more intricate and dangerous network than I ever imagined. Even as I walk away from the club, the feeling that I've seen just a small fraction of the Yakuza's empire lingers, leaving me with a sense of unease and awe. The code of loyalty within the Yakuza runs deeper than just following orders. It's an all-consuming, unwavering devotion to the organization, its leaders, and the collective identity it creates. This loyalty isn't rooted in friendship or affection. It's a system of control, fear, and respect. When I first heard about it, I imagined a kind of brotherhood, a pact formed out of mutual trust. But the reality is far more sinister and complex. The Yakuza live by an unspoken rule. To betray the group is to invite death, and even minor lapses in loyalty are met with swift and brutal consequences. As the day progresses, I witness this loyalty in action, not in the expected moments of solidarity, but in its darker, more frightening form. One of the lower-ranking members, a man in his late 30s with tattoos snaking up his arms, makes a slight mistake during a routine transaction. nothing that would be considered a serious issue by the outside world. Yet, in the eyes of the Yakuza, it's an affront to the code of respect that binds them together. The tension in the air is palpable as the boss, seated at the head of the room, watches silently. The man's mistake is met with a cold, calculating response. The boss doesn't shout or lose his temper. Instead, he quietly gives the order for the punishment to be carried out. I'm left stunned as the man is dragged into a side room by a few of his fellow gang members. It isn't clear what happens in there, but the muffled sounds of struggle are enough to send a chill down my spine. When they return, the man's face is bruised, his eyes hollow with shame. The boss doesn't even look up as he returns to his business, signaling that the matter is settled. There's no room for leniency, no opportunity for a second chance. A slight against the organization, no matter how small, is treated as a mortal sin. What I've just witnessed is a brutal display of what it means to be part of the Yakuza. Loyalty here isn't a choice. It's an obligation that demands absolute compliance. The system is unforgiving. The members are not seen as individuals, but as parts of a larger machine, each functioning to maintain the stability and power of the organization. The moment any one member falters or steps out of line, they risk disrupting the delicate balance that keeps everything in motion. The severity of the punishment isn't just a lesson for the man who made the mistake. It's a message to everyone else. The Yakuza operates on a system of fear, not just on the outside world, but within its own ranks. The members are not only loyal to their superiors, but also to each other, as any slip in allegiance could bring down a wave of consequences on the entire group. This system of control keeps everyone in check, making sure that no one ever gets too comfortable or thinks they can escape the consequences of their actions. In the Yakuza, loyalty means total submission to the organization's will, no matter what the personal cost. But beneath the cold, hard exterior of this loyalty, there's something more insidious at play: the manipulation of emotion. The Yakuza doesn't just demand respect, it cultivates an intense psychological bond between its members. This is not simply about following orders or adhering to a code. It's about the creation of a family, albeit a warped and violent one. The emotional bonds that form between members, forged through shared hardship and violence, become a tool of control. These bonds blur the line between affection and fear, making it even harder to leave once someone has fully embedded themselves within the organization. As I speak with some of the higher-ranking members, they speak reverently about the concept of honor. They tell me that the Yakuza is an organization built on respect for the hierarchy, but also on the idea that no one should be left behind. This idea sounds noble in theory, but in practice, it simply reinforces the oppressive structure that keeps the lower-ranking members in line. It's not about truly taking care of one another. It's about ensuring that no one steps out of place, and that anyone who does can be disposed of with little hesitation. The punishment I witnessed, while shocking, is not an isolated incident. It's a constant reminder that the Yakuza is not a group that tolerates weakness, deviation, or disobedience. The loyalty they demand isn't a choice, but a survival mechanism. Those who survive within the organization do so by continually proving their worth, by obeying without question and adhering to the harsh codes of conduct. Anything less is seen as betrayal, and betrayal is met with consequences too severe to imagine. It's a world where loyalty is both a shield and a weapon, and for many, the price of staying loyal is the gradual loss of their own identity. The emotional toll of this loyalty becomes evident in the faces of the Yakuza members I encounter throughout the day. They are men who have lived their lives in service to an organization that values obedience over individuality. Their loyalty to the boss, to the group, has cost them more than just their freedom. It has cost them the ability to truly live for themselves. As the day comes to a close, I can't help but reflect on the stark reality of the Yakuza's world. Throughout the day, I've witnessed scenes that seem to belong to another era, an era where power is maintained not through diplomacy or negotiation, but through fear, intimidation, and unflinching loyalty. At first glance, it's easy to be drawn into the illusion of power that the Yakuza exude. The boss is an imposing figure, his every word and gesture carrying weight. The members around him wear their tattoos like shields, their expressions unreadable, masking the lives they lead in the shadows. It's an intoxicating world for those who find themselves within it. But as the day unfolds, it becomes painfully clear that the price of this power is far steeper than one might expect. The Yakuza operates under an ironclad code, one that demands absolute loyalty. This is not mere camaraderie. It's a bond forged in blood, forged in a world where betrayal is often met with swift and brutal retribution. It's loyalty that dictates every interaction, every decision, and every movement within the group. For many, this code becomes their identity. To stray from it is to risk everything, not just personal safety, but family, friends, and even honor. It's a world where power is only respected if it's enforced with unwavering violence, where a lapse in loyalty could lead to public humiliation or worse. Yet, the people who live within this world rarely stop to consider the cost of such loyalty. It's a price that becomes evident as I witness the internal politics of the group. Every action, every favor, comes with a price tag attached. For those at the top, the burden of leadership is immense. The boss shoulders the responsibility of ensuring the group's survival, while his subordinates must constantly prove their worth. But for the lower-ranking members, the price is often paid in ways that might seem unimaginable to outsiders. Broken bodies, shattered lives, and the loss of a sense of self. The loyalty required by the Yakuza extends beyond just obeying orders. It's about sacrifice. And that sacrifice is felt most acutely by the families of those involved. I speak briefly with a few members who have spent decades in the organization, and the toll it's taken on their personal lives is evident. Their faces, etched with years of violence and hardship, tell a story of isolation. They have lost touch with loved ones, severed ties with friends who could not understand the life they chose. In the Yakuza, loyalty to the group often means loyalty to the exclusion of everything else. The cost of power is therefore not just the physical sacrifices made in service to the group, but the emotional and psychological ones as well. As I sit in the dimly lit room, watching the subtle power dynamics unfold before me, it becomes evident that this life is not for everyone. For some, the allure of power and protection is enough to justify the violence and the losses. But for others, the weight of the cost is unbearable. As I hear the stories of those who have lived this life for decades, there's a recurring theme of regret, a deep, unspoken yearning for a different path, a simpler life, but one that is impossible to return to once they've crossed the point of no return. What struck me most, though, is how the Yakuza, in their pursuit of power and dominance, have lost sight of the very humanity they sought to protect. There's an inherent loneliness that comes with this lifestyle, a separation from the rest of society. The Yakuza are not above the law, but they exist outside of it. The psychological toll this takes on individuals is profound, as they can never fully integrate into the world they're trying to control. The facade of strength masks the deep sense of insecurity and isolation that defines their existence. The price of power, it seems, is far higher than mere wealth or control. It's measured in the lives of those who devote themselves to the organization, in the people they hurt, and in the people they lose along the way. The cost is in the slow erosion of self, the loss of compassion, and the ultimate realization that the power they've so desperately fought to maintain has come at the expense of their own humanity. As I leave that day, the faces of the Yakuza members linger in my mind, their eyes empty, yet full of the knowledge that, no matter the price, they cannot escape the world they've created for themselves.